Now, our third and final speaker, who's keen to make sure that we do move along as fast as we can, because I'm conscious on time before we throw it open to the floor. Speaking on enterprise and innovation, Mark Gantly, Managing Director for HP Galway.
Thank you, David, and good morning. When we embarked on this exercise, I think it's almost a year ago, one of the pieces of information I was amazed to learn was that the population for the Greater Galway region in 2040 could extend to as many as 400,000 people. Yeah, that's a huge challenge and a huge opportunity for the enterprise sector. Our vision for 2040 is that Galway enterprise would be led from Galway. I'll talk some more about that in a moment. It will be enterprise that fully exploits all of Galway's unique capabilities, and that Galway will be equipped to win in whatever the new world order would be in 2040, just to say what that might be. Before we look forward, it's always useful to look back, not 30 but almost 40 years. In 1971, Digital Equipment Corporation landed in Galway to build computers. They didn't find a ready-made skilled workforce. Didn't even find a third-level system that was producing the sort of graduates that they needed. What they did find was a very strong secondary education system and a real flexible, can-do attitude amongst the people of Galway. Where we are today is very different. Mike and Terry have talked about the asset base that we have in terms of human capital that positions us very well for the next 30 years. We now produce the skills that we need in great abundance, a very strong third and fourth level sector. We should be mindful to remember the other two, the strong secondary education system and that flexible can-do attitude. They'll be just as important for the next 30 years. Over the last 30 years, there's no question that FDI, foreign direct investment, has dominated the enterprise sector in Galway. Companies like Digital and Nortel in the ICT sector, and more recently the Medtronics, the Boston Scientifics in medical devices, have generated massive amounts of employment and generated new skills that can be applied across many industries. And we're talking about a small number, a relatively small number of large enterprises generating in the hundreds to even thousands of jobs. FDI will continue to be a very important part of the Galway economy and the Irish economy over the next 30 years. However, we hope, we plan that there will be a shift towards indigenous enterprises, Galway enterprises innovated out of Galway through the asset base that Mike and Terry talked about. A large number of smaller enterprises. Some will thrive, some will be slow to thrive, some may fail. And a tolerance to failure is a hallmark of high-tech centres. You go to Silicon Valley, you go to Boston and elsewhere, what you find is a real tolerance to failure. So we need to be conscious of that. Not all will thrive, not all will thrive quickly, and some will fail. We anticipate that enterprise in 2040 would have shifted somewhat from the periphery of the city towards the downtown. Today, the large FDI companies occupy large, relatively anonymous buildings on the periphery of the city. As we build the indigenous sector, it will move towards the centre of town. Small companies need smaller social buildings. They need to feed off each other. So we see a huge shift in terms of people living and working in the centre of the city, feeding off each other. Again, a hallmark of successful high-tech centres. It's very dangerous to pick winners, especially 30 years hence. Few would have expected back 30 years ago in 1980 the growth, especially the impact of the internet, and fewer still would have anticipated that computer gaming and social networking would be the force which actually drove the internet forward. So it's very dangerous to pick winners. The best chance we have is to go after enterprises that fully exploit our unique capabilities. Through the FDI era, we focused principally on what economists call human capital, what we call people. That was the principal asset they came to Galway for. By 2040, we want to play with the full deck. Exploit the natural resources that Mike has talked about at length, especially the marine, but also the softer assets, Galway's strong tradition in arts and culture. This is the area that will generate the new businesses, the new enterprises that we haven't even thought of yet. What's going to fund all this enterprise? Our vision is that by 2040, the people of Galway will think of enterprise as a natural target for their investment euros, or whatever we're spending at that time. Today, all that investment comes, as the name suggests, from the foreign direct investment sector, and most of it. How will this change be affected? First of all, we'll have a higher percentage of Indigenous enterprise. It will be natural for Galway people to invest in Galway enterprises. We'll have a more tech-savvy population. People invest in what they know. You go to the high-tech centres in the US, and people naturally think of investing in technology. We'll also have probably a reactionary move away from what has been traditionally the target investment property. So a lot of that money will flow towards technology. Angel investor networks, small groups of people with experience and wealth willing to invest in and support new enterprises will be important. It would also be great to have facilities for small-scale investment where the ordinary person in Galway could invest modest amounts of money in new enterprises. And we have successful models today in farmers' cooperatives and credit unions for that type of activity.
Very fast. We can't hear you here.
Okay, Tom, I'll shout. We're a small city on a small island. Connections have always been important to us, and they'll be more important in the future. I'm going to borrow a metaphor from Mike, which is the idea of Galway and Ireland as the Venice of the 21st century. In the Renaissance, Venice, a very small city-state, was incredibly important as a trading post between East and West. We see the opportunity for Galway and for Ireland to act as the virtual trading post for the next 30 years. The trading post for ideas and knowledge rather than for products. We're uniquely well positioned geographically. Our working day touches India in the morning, it touches California in the evening. Our westward connections are extremely well connected, especially to the US. History, language, culture, politics, etc. have made it very easy for us to build and to develop the connections back to the US. We'll have to work harder over the next 30 years to build connections of similar strength towards the East. Education and culture are key to that. We need students, third and fourth level students, moving backwards and forwards between Galway, Ireland and the East. We also have an opportunity through culture to increase that affinity, through music and theatre, which give the opportunity to build sustained and effective connections with the growing economies of the East. It's very easy to be fanciful as we look forward. We've got to keep our feet on the ground. The smart economy will generate lots of opportunity. However, it's important that we fully exploit that opportunity. We do not want in Galway an R&D boutique for a few. We want social inclusion with the entire population benefiting from the growth. Competitiveness is key to exploiting that opportunity. I'm not just talking about labour costs, I'm talking about the cost of energy, the cost of communication, the cost of professional services. That will generate the large-scale employment that feeds off the smart economy. And manufacturing is key. It generates employment of itself. It's also a very good bellwether as to the overall competitiveness of the economy. So important as we look forward to keep our feet on the ground, that we don't end up with huge opportunity for the very few. We want social inclusion for all. I'm going to finish by thanking the contributors to the exercise. Mike Conroy from Cisco, Jerry Kilcommons from Medtronic, Corey Curtis from Boston Scientific, Mike Conroy again, Mike Turley from Derry, who's here with us today, and Shay Garvey from Delta Venture Partners, and also the many others who wittingly or unwittingly have influenced in our thoughts. I've given just a snippet of what we covered in the exercise over the last number of months. The paper we produced has a lot more detail. It also talks, for example, about the connection between research and enterprise. It talks about the need for Galway to focus, to decide what it's going to be good at and what it's going to leave to others. And I encourage you to read the paper. And I'm going to finish by summarising the key outcomes that come from the work that the enterprise, the marine and the research pillars did. So it's consolidated from the work that I led, that Mike led and that Terry led. And we now invite questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And I think we'll leave that slide up because that is a very effective summary of what we've heard. Now, I'm conscious